podcast where you hear from the artists you love. I'm your host, Kevin Coffey, and in this episode, I sat down with Matthew Sweet, the million-selling alt-rocker you might know from songs like Girlfriend and Sick of Myself. Matthew has 2 gold records, multiple top 10 rock hits, and he grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, near my hometown of Omaha, playing in bands like the Specs. Later on, he moved to the Athens, Georgia rock scene where he was friends with like R.E.M's Michael Stipe, and later on ended up in L.A. He did big things there, releasing smash hit albums like Girlfriend and 100% Fun, and he's been called a power pop god. And I was glad to talk to him again about his brand new record Catspaw that's out January 15th on Omnivore. And Matthew, interestingly, produced the entire album himself except for drums. He played all the instruments, produced it, mixed it, did everything, even lead guitar, which is something that he's never really done before. So it's really fun to sit down again with Matthew and talk about the recording process, inspiration from his friends and previous lead guitarists like Richard Lloyd, and just how this whole record came together, which, though he made it all on his own, he actually did so before the pandemic hit in 2020. Real quick, I want to remind you that you can listen to the Pops and Hisses podcast and find music news, reviews, and interviews at popsandhisses.com. But right now, it's time to talk to Matthew Sweet. Let's get into it. Yeah, so it's been an interesting time for sure. So I've been kind of asking this of everyone lately because usually the music business is so busy. It's recording and touring and driving and flying around and doing all these things, but everyone's been at home.
Yeah, for sure.
What have you been doing with yourself the last 9 months?
I had finished my album really just before the pandemic hit. I mastered it. I mean, like very shortly before everything got going and then shut down. And so I wasn't one of these people who, had a big creative burst.
Right.
Because of the pandemic. I've really spent a load of time watching stuff, just consuming content of movies and shows and just a tremendous amount of stuff. And, now that it's been kind of a year since I finished this record, I'm starting to think toward writing songs and doing some of that stuff. I mean, because things are still at such a height in the pandemic right now, I'm a little unsure when we'll really be back out touring. I'm starting to wonder if it's really going to be this summer or next fall, or if it's going to be longer than that. I mean, the hardest thing is really that's mostly how I make my living, is touring.
Right.
And so it really is like all making money kind of stopped. And unlike a lot of artists, I didn't, immediately start doing shows and stuff online. I guess when it first was happening, I just felt kind of like it wasn't appropriate in some weird sort of way.
Yeah.
But more recently, I've started to, get into a Facebook Live thing on, I guess it was just after New Year's or on New Year's, I can't remember. And so I can see now doing them. I did an acoustic thing. But we did have, finding a home for the record and getting the artwork together and those things, which I also did, over the last few months.
Yeah. So it's such a weird time because, like you said, most people would just be going, and it's hard to even make plans now. I had a friend who said, well, I had tickets to go to Red Rocks to see a band and it got moved to June. And so I'm really excited for that. And I said, well, fair warning.
Yeah.
You're going to be going to Red Rocks in June.
It might not be June, although I guess it's more likely because it's such a big outdoor place.
Yeah, outdoor place, so that could work.
They could sort of make sure people sat apart a little bit there.
Right. But it's so weird. I'm like you. I've spent time watching the HBO shows everyone says I should watch and have not had time to watch.
Yeah.
Doing stuff like that.
I've done that on everything, every streaming service. In fact, one of my dreams is to kind of try to make a list of everything I consumed like over the last year. entertainment wise. And my only worry is I'm afraid I'm going to include things that are from before the pandemic, like some
I
things I'm
agree.
not sure kind of exactly when it was, but I
Yeah.
guess no one would have to know. They could think I did it during the pandemic, even if I have some things from before.
Right. Well, that's always me because I have little kids too. So I'm like, yeah, my favorite movie I watched last year, and I'm like, it was a recent movie. Then I look, oh, that was from 5 years ago. I'm fine.
That's all right. We
Yeah,
understand if you're a dad.
totally. So yeah, and I thought it was interesting for you too because, like you said, you finished the album right before this. So yeah, a lot of people are just like, well, I had some downtime, and it's kind of the perfect time for musicians, right? Because you can be at
Yeah,
home in
yeah.
the studio, but you just were kind of already out of that mode.
Yeah, and it's also just kind of a funny coincidence that the album itself is such a kind of loner album,
Right?
because I
Yeah.
played all the lead myself and stuff. It it feels like weirdly appropriate, even though it didn't happen during the actual time frame.
Right.
But I usually need kind of a few months after I make a record before I feel like I can clear my mind and start something new. I have to kind of forget the other record a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I'm just getting to that point now. I guess I'm kind of glad I'm going to be home a while longer because that's going to help me kind of get that process going. I mean, I'm a real loner. I don't go out anyway. I don't really socialize.
Yeah.
Just my wife and I hang out. She works during the day and then we hang out at night. And so in a strange way, it's not that different for me, except obviously I would be going and working and
Sure.
doing shows at least part of the year.
Yeah. Well, and for you too, it's weird. It's got to be weird. You were talking about streaming, and I thought of this too because a lot of people they're they're around their band or they live in the same town as their band, and
Yeah.
you can't just be like, all right, fellas, we're doing a streaming show.
No, anything I do is going to be alone.
Yeah.
Although I know there are people that have figured out how to do, you know,
Yeah. Stream
in
it all
two
together at
places,
once.
yeah,
Right.
get it kind of a mashup. I just haven't really approached doing that. I mean, my management manages some other artists, and all of them have done way more than I've done. They've just kind of started talking me into, giving it a shot and going live and figuring out some things.
Yeah. And I mean, the good thing for you too is you have the studio, so that's a good space to be able to figure it
Yeah, it's
all out.
easy for me to record whenever I want to.
Yeah.
um but I still tend to go in batches. I don't tend to just work all the time.
Right.
I don't really want it to all run into itself, you know what I mean? It's like nice to kind of clear my head and feel like I'm at blank slate when I start up again.
Right. Like shake off the previous thing and move into something else.
Yeah.
So, um, it was interesting to me, and you mentioned this in the press release they sent out, but talking about being what's funny is back in Nebraska as a teenager, thinking about someday I'll play lead guitar.
Yeah, no, that's
In
really
the
true. Like
UFC.
I really did like once have this kind of moment. Well, I sort of had this thing where I would think like I was convinced that I was a bass player
Right.
initially, and I was convinced that like even when I didn't play bass, somehow my ability to play bass improved just in the back of my mind, sort of subconsciously. It was just some feeling sort of that I had. And I just remember one day thinking, I wonder if I'll be able to play lead guitar someday, just because I'm so old. I've just kind of absorbed it. And that's what I did on this record. And it was even sort of like I thought around this age.
That's fun.
So it was this weird thing I thought about. And maybe that did play into last couple years. I was sort of like, I'm going to do one where I play all the guitars on it. So I didn't really know what it would be like. I didn't know to what degree I'd really be able to do it. I mean, I did start out by making multi-tracks all on my own.
Hmm.
So I played lead, back when I was really young, but I never, considered it to be, any kind of pro quality. And one of the fun things for me was, hooking up with other people. And it, was like fresh for me when other people played on stuff. It kind of brought this whole other angle, and it made
Hmm.
it a little less sort of lonely to be
Yeah.
just the solo guy, but at this point, I don't know. I just thought I'm going to do one where I play all the lead. I guess I thought it would make, for sure, it would make it its own kind of special thing. So
Right.
so I got into it and I really enjoyed it. I didn't really belabor it. It's not belabored. It's everything was done pretty quickly and comped the way we would do in the
Hmm.
studio. I found, you let people play whatever they feel in that moment and they can kind of go crazy, and it doesn't matter if they make mistakes and stuff, because you can, any little mistakes that, are bothersome enough, it's just so easy, to fix them.
Right.
So I tried to just, do 2 or 3 takes and then go through, erase everything terrible, and then kind of look at where in the song there's like that visual aspect in Pro Tools,
Right.
where I had good stuff, and I would just kind of try the different things and use what seemed good.
Yeah. It was interesting you were talking about being a teenager and thinking, well, someday I'll just like unlock this almost. But when I'm a very bad guitar player, but I know enough to know how good other people are, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And I know enough, I play some.
Oh, you're probably good.
I do think there's that thing sometimes where you're playing in any instrument and you have almost a mental block that I can't do this. I'm not good enough to do this. And somewhere along the way, and maybe it's practice and you get better, but sometimes it's just telling yourself, man, I could probably do this. And somewhere along the line it just like clicks and it goes in. Do you feel like
Yeah,
that happens sometimes? Or it
I
happens to
do. There was a time, I think, when I kind of thought I'm sure I could learn any instrument especially if I got lessons.
Sure.
Um, but one thing popped in my mind. I got it in my head I was going to try to learn to play the cello. I thought, well, surely I can play those simple kind of cello lines like on, Beatles records or whatever. I love that chung, 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 chung sound, like I Am the Walrus or whatever,
Yeah.
And and I borrowed a cello, and like I just so couldn't do it. It was like just like really impossible. Like I was kind of shocked because I played, I don't know, when I was in, fourth or fifth grade, I played the violin,
Hmm.
and I did a little bit in, a junior youth orchestra or whatever. And so I kind of thought, I have some experience with it. I'll be able to do it. But that was a time where it was really difficult to learn. That's an instrument I
Right.
just don't think I can fake it on. But everything else I could kind of fake. I could always, sort of play keyboards and piano, sort of play other kinds of guitar, and usually another instrument like a ukulele or something I could
Right.
sort of pick up. Um, uh, but uh, but yeah, I don't know. I think that I just had so much exposure to really great lead guitar players, both touring and on my
Yeah.
records over the years. It just sort of influenced my brain. So even though I never really had any lessons, I feel like I absorbed kind of the emotional attack of it enough to
Yeah.
kind of do it.
Well, that was one thing I was going to ask. I mean, I'm sure you weren't thinking like, what would Richard Lloyd do on this song? But like, yeah, it sounded like some of your guitar playing is influenced by people that you've played with before.
Well, yeah, and I think Richard, if I had to pick one person, I would probably pick Richard.
Yeah.
But he just had a way he would go at things that was just had a spirit to it that I really liked. And that's what I think I learned from him, was just sort of the attack of it. And He also is a very melodic
Hmm.
player, and is a very melodic player, I should say, because he's
Yeah.
still around and at it. And I don't know. I think that's fair. That if I had to pick one person who is my biggest influence, I think it would be Richard. Like I still remember, I met him when I did a tour with the Golden Palominos in 1986. And at the end of our tour, our lead guitar player, this guy Jody Harris, I don't know if you remember the Ray Beats. He was from
Yeah.
an instrumental group from New York called the Ray Beats, and he had some falling out with Anton Fear, who was the drummer who it was his project, the Palominos.
Hmm.
And Richard got hired to come in and play these last couple dates we played at the Lone Star Cafe in New York.
Hmm.
And it was like we had one rehearsal for a couple of hours, and he was supposed to learn like everything. It was just
Yeah.
like totally impossible for anyone to have done. And we just kind of bonded at that session. I felt bad for him that he was like under the gun to learn so much stuff. And we were doing a few songs of mine from my first record on Columbia, and he was like nice to me about them, like, I like your poppy songs or whatever. And we just kind of hit it off. And I love him. He's a really great person. And but what I was trying to get to is I was in a sublet at the time, making my second record for A&M, the
Hmm.
one before Girlfriend,
Yeah.
which Richard also played on a lot. And I remember he came over to the sublet, and we just kind of sat at a table, and I had some kind of demos I was working on, and he just kind of jammed along to a tape or something, sitting at the table with me. And I was just like, this is so perfect.
Yeah.
This is so great. I want you to play so bad. And he was like, sure. And over time, it's funny, he also coined this term where he said, I do shards. I do shards for you, Matthew. And that kind of speaks a little bit to that kind of the angle,
Hmm.
I guess I can say angular-ish sort of attack that he had in his lead playing. And he knew that was kind of what I was looking for, like just bits of commentary, on the lead guitar.
Right.
So
Yeah. I like that way of thinking about it. Well, yeah, one of the things I liked about the record is it's a really interesting album. There's a lot of different sounds on the record, a lot of harder things, like Blown Away, but there's more like groove based stuff like Drifting too. Was there any musical sort of angle you were looking at when you were coming to these songs?
I don't think so much. I think that I had stored up a lot of little ideas of just kind of chord progressions and things.
Hmm.
Sometimes I would write just titles and things in my notes, in my phone or my iPad. So, certain things like I might have had a bunch of little ideas, snippets, and then I might marry a title or some kind of angle to that thing. Sometimes it all came right then,
Right.
all together. But I didn't really have a sense of what the album, excuse me, would be like. I don't know if I ever really do. I
Yeah.
mean, what comes out is sort of me, and there's only so different I can sort of force it to do. So instead, I try to just be a good version sort of myself,
Yeah.
and get out of the way of the music and, let it flow. And really the only, criteria I had was that I was going to play all the lead. And I was kind
Hmm.
of, relying on that to do enough to distinguish it where it had its own sort of thing about it. Um, at the time, yeah, I thought of it as being more harder, kind of more simplified version of things. I felt like
Sure.
kind of I wasn't doing ballads or even super melodic things that much. But then, kind of looking back on it, I really did do kind of all those things that I would normally do. But I had it, I was trying to go after a little harder, simpler, direct
Sure.
kind of thing, just guitar, bass, drums. And I didn't get into as much of a, dreamland and, softer sorts of
Hmm.
things as maybe I would usually do, just because I always tried to make my albums have a wide variety of things on them, because I guess I kind of got that from like the Beatles, or
Yeah.
I've always thought, people who are really great have, really different songs. They don't all sound like the same song. And so I kind of always had it in my head to make sure, I picked a wide range of ideas. In the case of Catspaw, I sort of didn't have any more very much than I recorded. I mean, there were
Yeah.
only probably I can't remember if there's 12 on it, maybe. I probably only had maybe 16, 17
Oh,
songs. So
okay.
there's only really a handful that didn't go on it. Every now and then, I'll get a song in my head and I'll realize, oh yeah, that's that song I didn't put on the album. Kind of for a minute I'll go, too bad I didn't,
Yeah.
couldn't put it on or whatever. But everything will exist. I mean, with the internet, everything will see the light of day someday.
Right.
So it kind of almost doesn't matter if things float off in different
Yeah.
areas and aren't right with the album.
Well, the beauty of the especially digital technology too is it's not like it's laying on some master tape in a closet
Yeah,
somewhere that you have to access.
it
You know,
won't be
it's all
like
on your computer.
destroyed over time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good feeling. I mean, I remember when the first DAT machines came out,
Hmm.
and it was the first time we could mix our little multi-track tapes at home onto a thing that sounded as good as, what
Yeah.
you mixed out of, and it would never change, and it was just like the greatest device ever invented. That was
Yeah.
before we had recordable CD
Hmm.
machines, and long before we could just pop stuff in a playlist and make CDs from it off our computer.
Right.
So I do like that. I do like that about the internet, the sort of ease of sending around music. It's cool also, even though I didn't really do it on this album, it's really cool to be able to just send tracks to people. I mean,
Right.
I don't even have to make like clicks and do that kind of stuff. I can just send a track and someone can pop it in. And as long as they've moved it, to the very beginning of the session, they
Right.
can do stuff and send me just those tracks, and I can just fly it in right along with what I did. And it's I think really cool for musicians to be able to
Oh yeah.
work on their own without that pressure. And sometimes I get asked like, well, but do you need that pressure? And I kind of think no. Like, I think if anything, that sort of pressure in the studio, if I think back, those were the hardest times for people, when they felt kind of on the spot. And I
Yeah.
think that music responds really well to freedom and kind of not feeling pressure.
Right. Right. I mean, it's nice. You had Rick on the record. It had this happen right now. You were making it. You could just say, "Hey, can you record those drums and send them to me?" I don't know if you'll come to
Yeah,
Omaha or if that's what you did, but
we probably could sort of do that, and he could find a place,
right.
to go and do it. Lucky for us, it was 2019, so he just
Yeah.
drove down from, he lives outside of Minneapolis now,
Oh,
so
okay. Yeah.
he just drove down and came and played. And that's what we've been doing for a long, long time. He's been coming over to my house and recording ever
Mhm.
since I've been able to record at home, which is, I guess, almost since the turn of the century,
Mhm.
if we
Yeah.
can call it that.
And that made me think about it too. I mean, doing this solo record, it was really only Rick on the album, right? Because you did everything. It sounded like you were doing the backing vocals and doing pretty much all the stuff, right?
Yeah, I did everything. And I normally do a lot,
Sure.
but I just usually have at least a couple other people that sort of play on it. Um, and part of that's just because it's fun to share the music with other people,
Hmm.
that's just a little bit sort of lonely or whatever to just be the one guy. But in this case, I planned that and it was cool.
Yeah.
I could certainly do it again. I mean, I guess I don't know exactly what I'll do because I haven't really written the music for the
Sure.
next thing, but um, that will determine, I guess, what I do. If I feel like I need other people, I'll get other people. If I feel like I'll do it myself again, I'll do
Yeah.
that.
Was this kind of I mean, like you said, you've always kind of done your own thing, but was this kind of the dream with the studio you have now? Is just like, well, it's just me. I've got this space and I can play around and do whatever I want. And, you don't have to rent space or make sure someone
Yeah,
comes
I
to town.
mean,
You just do whatever you want.
yeah, and I've had that feeling for a long time because I've had a home studio for a long time.
Right.
So it's not really a new feeling, but it's a really good feeling to just be able to do that. I feel lucky that that's how I started out writing songs,
Hmm.
was learning to multi-track myself. And if anything, I had to kind of get comfortable with doing it at home. I was, often gonna make a record where I did it at home, even during sort of my heyday. But I never quite had sort of the confidence to just do it all alone
Hmm.
when I was, had these, big budgets and a lot of sort of pressure on me for, they're looking for, singles and things.
Right.
Um, so it took really a little bit until the industry started kind of imploding for me to become more comfortable just Wild West doing it on my own. And I don't think I would go back. I mean, I guess it'd be great if tons of records still sold, and it's just
Sure.
a kind of a different world. And so, I'm lucky enough that I come from a time where it was before sort of the internet, and at least I have that kind of history, to come out of. I can't imagine now. There's just so many people having bands and doing music
Hmm.
because everyone can do it on their own,
Yeah.
on their phone or wherever. And because there's so much more electronic music, you don't have to have a lot of musical ability to put together tracks
Hmm.
and make records, quote unquote, or whatever. And so it does sort of seem like, I'm sure there's much great music being made, and it'll be so much of it that it's going to take a lot of time for the people of the future to sort through it all.
Oh man.
But
Yeah.
I think there's going to, just think how many, big stars there'll be, things that kind of fell between the cracks but were really important and vital. And I just imagine there's more stuff than ever.
Oh yeah, and it's easier to find, which is nice. It's interesting too because just talking about recording and stuff, you obviously learned how to do a lot of this stuff yourself, but then you also lived through the era of like, well, to make this record, we have to rent this big studio and get a
Oh
producer
yeah.
and get all these musicians. And what's interesting now is like you don't need any of that stuff very clearly. I mean, you definitely have the skills to be able to produce your own record and play all the music because you're a talented person, but a producer would not have necessarily helped you in this situation, but
Yeah,
in
maybe
a different
not.
era, you would have been required to have done that.
Not actually, yeah, not actually necessary. Yeah, back then it was like they wanted you to spend a ton of money,
Oh yeah.
and they were in a whole, different game of like, also they sort of had the ability to spend money and make things happen. And
Hmm.
so if you sort of, were delivering, a thing they felt invested in, that was, you were really lucky to, like, be an artist who the label sort of,
Mm.
was counting on. Um, but, but it also was sort of frustrating. I always felt like, I could never quite give them really what they wanted. It was this
Right.
kind of slightly uneasy sort of thing. And, I tried not to think about it and just make albums like I thought of good albums being, or whatever. But I never really felt like, and maybe it's just because I wasn't, that kind of person. I wasn't like, I wanted to be on stage from when I was really young and have everybody look at me. And like, I didn't have that aspect of really being a performer. I was, a home studio guy.
Yeah.
So I had to, learn to go out and play live and deal with being myself and figure out kind of who that was. And, it was really a label that talked me into doing that. They're like, we think you should use your real name and be like a solo artist.
Yeah.
And otherwise I probably would have, had a group, that was really me, but
Right.
had, a group name like so many people did. And it, to me, that was just cooler. I never really wanted to be a guy standing with a guitar. And that's totally what labels wanted me to
Yeah.
be. So I was always pushing for weird hobbies of mine to be involved in the artwork and trying not to be just boring.
Yeah. Yeah. Not be the just photo of you on the cover.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all they wanted.
Yeah.
So I'm always like blurry because like that was the compromise.
Yeah.
Well, if you're gonna have a photo of me, I want it to be really weird and arty.
Yeah.
So they were almost never happy with covers that I made,
Oh, I'm sure. Well, I'm sure they wanted we need to market you as a person.
Yes.
Like you're the brand.
That's right. But that's another one of the great things about now. Like, I
Mm.
don't like pictures of myself and I don't have to put them on my album.
Yeah,
It's
right.
so cool. Like, I don't even have to think about the pressure of that.
That's great. Well, I thought it was interesting you ended up in Omnivore. That's a cool label that does a lot of current artists and retro releases, and they've won Grammys for a bunch of different stuff. That's a neat place to land.
Well, I'd always heard great things about them. I met a couple people from the label
Mhm.
back when I did some producing on a Bangles record, and they were
Oh, right.
somehow involved in that. I don't know that they released it, but they did something for it. And I just had it in my head always, they're really cool. It had a lot of people tell me they were really great people. Rick knew them.
Mm.
And so when we decided to try and shop my record around, they were really the ones that seemed to respond most immediately and really be excited about the record. Like
Right.
they actually, listened to it and dug it. And so we decided to work with them, and they've been great. And I totally hope we can do more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a cool place. Well, yeah, that's Matthew, that's most of the stuff I want to talk about. I really like the new record. I like how, I mean, you were talking about it's a really straightforward kind of rocking guitar drums record, but I just love the diverse sound on it too. So it's
Well,
a
thanks so
cool
much. I
album.
I
Yeah,
really appreciate it coming from you.
absolutely. Well, I was excited to talk to you, but it was funny too. It kind of happened at a perfect time because I was going through a lot of my stuff from my old job, and there were a lot of Matthew Sweet CDs in there. So I was kind of going through the history of it.
Sorry.
Like, no, it was great because I was going through just stuff I had brought from my desk, and I was, it was kind of the catalog of Matthew Sweets. It was kind of a perfect time to talk to you because I was thinking about, and I put on some of those records too. So good way
Oh,
to
that's great. Well, I was excited to see you were on the list to do an interview. So nice to
absolutely.
see you.
Yes, you too. Thanks
Um,
for taking the time for me as always.
it's a nice change to be able to look at each other.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know what I mean by that, but I've had a few interviews actually where it's not that they have any kind of video podcast, but it's just the chance has gotten in people's heads of what it's like if you're actually seeing each other to do an interview, and a lot of people prefer it.
Years of doing so many phone interviews, because that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
All the time. It's kind of nice to do these because it's more familiar, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You feel like you're actually having a conversation.
Yeah, it's just more personal.
Yeah.
I like it.
Me too. Well, yeah, man. Looking forward to what comes next, and hopefully you can get out and play some shows whenever that's.
Yeah, no kidding. Awesome. Wow. Yeah, and it's, for me, it's like small clubs are like my place, even, all around the country. So the people are jammed in when I play shows, and it just, I don't want to die, you know what I mean? Let alone them, So
maybe in springtime,
we'll make sure it's safe.
Yeah, maybe in springtime or summer, someone here in Omaha can arrange an outdoor show for you or something if people aren't comfortable.
Yeah, maybe so.
We'll see. Well, great, man. Thanks so much for your time. Good to see you.
Thank you, and you stay safe with your family.
You too. Thanks, Matthew.
Yep, bye.
Thanks for listening to Pops and Hisses. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, or head to popsandhisses.com, where you can listen to the podcast and find more music news, reviews, interviews, and what else? More podcast episodes. I'm your host, Kevin Coffey, and you can follow me on Twitter as @OmahaMusicGuy, or find my page on Facebook by searching for Kevin Coffey. My last name is spelled Coffey, by the way. Thanks to Herdat Media for producing the show, and I encourage you to check out Herdat's network of podcasts such as my friends Pat and JT, who tell great and funny stories, or Meathead Test Kitchen, where they talk about food and fitness. Find them all at herdatmedia.com/network. That's HURRDAT media.com/network. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
A Herdat Media Production.